Hello and welcome to Sales Development Represent, a video series dedicated to modern sales best practices and actionable tips for SDRs. In this episode, we're diving into sales follow-up and nurture best practices for reps. And joining us today is Sarah Brazier from Gong.io. She is a rising star in the world of sales development. Thanks so much for being here, Sarah.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Why don't you give the audience a bit of background on you and sort of your situation?
Yeah, totally. So I'm an SDR at Gong. I've been an SDR at Gong for about a year and a half. I started January 7th, 2019.
Okay.
That's when I started. Yeah. So it's been a good minute of SDRing for Gong. And before that, I was an SDR at another company. So all told, I've been an SDR for just over 2 years. And before that, I had a hodgepodge of different roles, be it like I worked in social media and like creating videos for a nonprofit for a while. That was my first job out of college. And then I was a drama teacher
Cool.
at a middle school. And then I moved out to the Bay Area to be an actor and struggled for a long time and found myself an SDR job so I could pay the bills. And then I ended up really falling in love with sales. So that's who I am and how I got to be me.
And
the
here you are
30-second
now, yeah.
version. Now you know everything and
Everything.
cut.
Awesome. Well, I think that leads in well to sort of the first question that I wanted to ask you and sort of tee this up. You know, you sort of found yourself in this SDR role after coming to California and trying to get into acting. And I'm sure you picked up on a lot of things really early on that were vital to success and sort of what made you so successful in your role. And one of those things is follow-up and nurture processes. A lot of reps understand right away that you're not going to see success on the first touch, and SDRs need repeatable systems in place to consistently manage follow-ups within their workflow and really take stock of all of the people that they're reaching out to. And that system really becomes a backbone for whether or not you can sustain success within the role. So I'm going to ask you to kick things off in your opinion. What are really the big picture components that an SDR needs to create that basic system for follow-up?
Yeah. So I think like the data shows that it takes like it's like a minimum of 16 touches before you ever get a response from a prospect. That number could be wrong. You guys probably know better than I do.
Somewhere in that range.
Yeah. And you know, not all prospects are created equal. So some people will follow up with your first email you send, and that's like, hallelujah, praise be. But then there are people that you follow up with for 6 months, and you have to start getting creative. So for me, there's like, I think like the thing that one of the things that I probably could not live without as an SDR is having a system like Outreach, like a tool to help me figure out who I need to be talking to today, and having a system in there to make sure that I'm following up with prospects, you know, seeing how I've touched them in the past, making sure I'm not repeating messaging or, you know, subject lines. I have a couple of subject lines that I just like, can't think of anything. This will knock them dead. It's just noticed on your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think like having the tools and system in place in order to follow up, and then figuring out what processes work. So sort of kind of coming up with like how, you know, looking at the data and understanding, are we getting our meetings through emails, through LinkedIn, through phone, through, you know, other forms of social media, through direct mail campaigns, through video campaigns, through Drift, like starting to figure that stuff out as well. Which is sort of a manager's job. It's not the SDR's job to know those things. But that, I think that's like the first thing that you need in order to have good follow-up is like a system to follow up with people.
Right. Yeah. Without that system, what are you going to do? You can't remember all of these things in your head. And I think that's something a lot of reps struggle with at the beginning, where it's like, oh, I followed up with John on Tuesday. I got to follow up with him again on Thursday. It's a key target account. I'm going to remember that. Thursday rolls around, nothing.
No.
You totally forgot. So
yeah, and like there's always times like I write stuff down in my notebook all the time, and well, shoot, did I do it? Probably not. If I put page 3, I'll be like, wow, there's so many great prospects in here.
Yeah.
I got a lot of warm leads I got to follow up on. So I think like that's like the next thing is whatever system you do end up using, you have to be consistent about it. And in my experience, notebooks are not the best way because it's not proactively reminding you that you need to follow up with this person, as well as Excel spreadsheets, even like reminders in Salesforce. If you all use Salesforce out there, like those can be not so great.
You can miss them pretty easily.
You can miss them. Well, I've got my pop-ups turned off, so I always miss them. So for me, it's like using Outreach. They've got so many tools in place to follow up. But I mean, there's other things. There's like Mixmax and SalesLoft, but those like that's if you're trying to build out a really good SDR org, I would totally encourage you to get on a platform like that. That's my little pitch. Even though I'm not selling for any of those people, you should go by Outreach.
I love it. And it sounds so simple too. I mean, it's really strange because lead nurturing is really kind of intimidating for a lot of SDRs because, I mean, you're right. Really every buying situation is unique, which kind of means that you need to take a different approach each time you're trying to stay top of mind. And so thinking about how an SDR could get started, let's say a newer SDR, someone entering into a new industry, how do you see an SDR starting a follow-up process? They have the software now. The management has them set up with collateral and support so they can do their jobs. But now we're getting to the nitty-gritty of like, what does it look like? How do you get it started in your workflow? Is it simple as the software piece, or is it an end-to-end system?
Yeah. Okay. So how are we getting started using the software? Or how are we getting started just like following up with people?
I would say the follow-up process, because it sounds like the commonalities here are, you need a good system for being able to manage these tasks and manage these conversations. But the crux is that all buying situations are different, selling models are different, roles are different. So just in general, like how could an SDR start on this Monday or tomorrow and start implementing a process with their pipeline? What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think like the first thing is like, we'll zoom it out and we'll think about how do you need to be thinking of yourself as an SDR? And I think about, when online shopping is really hot right now because we're all hanging out in a pandemic. And so when I go on Instagram or on Facebook or on like, I don't know, I'm old. So those are like the social media tools I use outside of LinkedIn. So whatever the kids are getting on these days that has ads, like you think about how many times you have to see an ad before you even click on it to go check out the website to be like, yeah, do I really want to buy that pot? I've been getting like cookware ads because I'm old. So like how many times do I have to like watch the ad all the way through before I click on it? And then I'm going to click on it probably like a couple times before I ever make a purchase of the cool Instapot thing. And then some people, well, there's my boyfriend, he's making coffee. So like that's, you're the SDR. As the SDR, you are the marketer who is showing up on people's Facebook, and you're showing up on their Instagram, and maybe you're showing up in an email campaign, and maybe you're showing up on the phone. There's lots of ways to show up because people go to different places. So you think, okay, cool. I'm doing B2B sales now. So I'm not going to be on someone's, Facebook account or Instagram, probably. Maybe I might, it depends on where my prospects hang out online, but I'm going to show up there and I'm going to create a presence. And I'm going to probably show up in their inbox. I'm also going to show up on the phone because some people are like phone people and they pick up the phone. I don't, because my phone's always on do not disturb. So I'm not a good person to prospect over the phone, but you don't know that. Now you do. Don't prospect me. I'm an SDR. There's no reason to prospect me. And then there's also people who actually read their email. I don't do that either, unless it's from a prospect. But like, so that's where you start showing up, and you have to remember that like some people are email people, and some people are LinkedIn people, and some people are phone people, and some people are none of those things. And you just have to cross your fingers and get lucky, or send them a cake to their front door. But like, so if I were to start a campaign tomorrow, like a drip campaign for a first touch and follow up with a prospect, I would go onto LinkedIn and I'd go find Sam Nelson, who works for Outreach, and he puts out a ton of content all about how to reach out to prospects. And Gong uses this thing called the Agoji sequence, and it's kind of like the skeleton for how to talk to a prospect. And it's something that Sam created. So I have to shout him out because I use it every day. But it's a series of 16 touches that take place over like 28 days, something like that. Morgan Ingram is also a really good person to look at because he does a lot of, looking at he posts a lot on LinkedIn about like good sequences. So it's 16 steps. I'm looking at it right now on my screen. And the first thing is a manual email on the same day. And the next step on that same day is a connection request on LinkedIn and a phone call. So I'm hitting everybody up. I'm hitting like my prospect up in the 3 spaces where I know they probably live, because I sell to sales leaders, and sales leaders love LinkedIn.
Very true. It's like the Facebook for them.
Yeah. And then because I use Outreach and it's fantastic, I can automate a couple more email touches that take place over the next couple days. So I've built out a sequence that the first touch is a manual email, but the next 2 touches are like, hey, any thoughts? And then a second note that gives more context for what it is we do. And I tweak these based off of, I work enterprise accounts, so I tweak these based off of the company that I'm emailing and what problems I think they have. Then I make more phone calls, then I send more LinkedIns, and these are all automated within my campaign. But that's if I'm touching like a fresh prospect. And I feel like we kind of also want to talk about what happens if someone says, yeah, cool, I'd love to check out your product in 3 months, hit me up then. Absolutely. And then they hang up. Or someone is like, I'll think about it. Let me think about it.
Yeah, that's like the big, I think, and you touched on this, but like so many SDRs, we give them these tools and these sequences and the ability for them to get that initial swell of outreach going, and they understand like, okay, it's structured so that, my first through 16th touch points are kind of sequenced out for me, and I understand that. But it's when someone does get back to you and asks, like you said, for a follow-up in 3 months, or asks to get more information via email, or some other sort of half blow off, half I don't know if you're serious kind of response, that's where like the disconnect happens. And you all of a sudden are taken out of this incredibly comfortable, structured 16 touch sequence and put into a more sort of ad hoc-ish, I need to reach out at the right time, or I might mess this up, or they've expressed interest and I need to take advantage of the situation. So it's intimidating for a lot of reps to go from that structure to that unknown. So how would you recommend someone sort of A, validate interest, and then B, go about actually following up with those people?
Yeah, so I think like the first you have to validate interest, and the second follow up with them. So I think the first thing for me is especially if it's happening on a cold call, it's harder to qualify or disqualify interest in an email because you can't hear tone. And people tend to be much more brief in their responses. So sometimes someone says not interested, and in your brain you go like, how are you not interested? Like this.
You've given me nothing.
You don't, and also like you don't even really know what we do. Like, so then you need to respond with like, hey, my bad. I feel like I didn't do a good job giving context about what's going on here. Like, you should. I wouldn't email them back though. The first thing I always do is if someone says me and not interested is I give them a call and I say, hey, I got your note and I really appreciate it. I feel like I did a really bad job of articulating our value. And I just wanted to see if I could have, a few minutes of your time just to understand like what's on your plate and what's eating up all your time. And then see if they'll bite. Sometimes they do. Most of the time they don't, but that's the name of the game as an SDR is like, yes, rejected for the 19th time today.
Yeah.
Very good. But the 20th time, I'll get them.
Hey, 1 out of 20, like that's not a bad day.
Oh, that's really good.
5%? Yeah.
So, so I think like the first thing is like, you need to just figure out if follow up in 3 months really means follow up in 3 months, or it means I'm not interested and I want you to leave me alone and I really don't want your email showing back up in my inbox. And that's when you say something like, hey, can I level with you? I've been getting that a lot lately. Like people tell me follow up in 3 months and then I follow up and it turns out that they just wanted me to go away.
Right.
Am I off base here in assuming that that's actually what you're saying? And then
no, yeah, you're 100% right. Like that idea of, and it's so like easy for a newer rep to kind of slip into that too. When someone says follow up in 3 months, they don't necessarily have the experience to know that it is, like you're saying, just kind of a blow off. And then in 3 months, you're going to get another email that's like, reach out in 6 months, or, oh, this is low on the priority list. And you could have, like you were talking about, done more at the time to further qualify or prioritize that prospect.
Yeah. And so you just want to figure out if it's worth your time to put them into a drip sequence, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, is it worth my time to make sure that I put a reminder in outreach and like write them down in my notebook and do whatever to make sure that I'm following up with them? Is that worth my time? So I need to try to qualify this person. And then typically what you can do if you use a tool like Outreach or SalesLoft, or like, I don't even know all of them because I'm just little old me and I don't spend my time researching.
No, I don't think anyone knows all of them. There's too many at this point. So
yeah, but most of them have some kind of feature built in that where you can drop someone into a drip sequence after they've told you not interested or after follow up in 3 months, and you can put reminders in. So like one of the things that like our manager built out for our team, and if you don't have it, you could build it out yourself probably. As an SDR, or you could build it out for your team, is you can create a follow-up sequence where you literally can put in times for when do I send like a reminder when I need to send this person an email again. And did they say 3 months or 3 days? Because like in 3 months, I usually cut that in half and I touch base a month and a half later, because typically the prospect doesn't really remember. And there's so much that can change in a quarter. Right? There's so much that can change in 3 months. So just have like a checking in without saying checking in follow-up piece. And it should be like a manual email and maybe a phone call. And you can build that in and drop your prospect into that. So you can make sure you follow up with them. And when you do reach out, you shouldn't say, I don't like talking in absolutes because first of all, I never follow all of my own advice all the time. and second of all, like, there are nothing is absolute except on mortality.
It's got dark real quick, but I mean,
yeah.
Kind of right.
Yeah. I mean, I really dislike absolutes, which is, yeah. So I would suggest when you follow up, you need a new inciting incident to start the conversation. So typically in your outreach, right, when you have your first touch, there's some inciting incident. Hey, I noticed that this thing happened and it's probably doing something to your business. So you need a new inciting incident a month and a half later. Hey, I noticed that you raised a round of funding. I noticed that you hired 8 more people onto your team. I noticed that your title changed. I noticed that, I don't know. I noticed that COVID-19 happened and your quarterly earnings call says that your company's dealing with it in these 3 ways. I know we spoke a month and a half ago and you wanted to talk, I would probably like try to allude, like not say you told me to follow up in 3 months, but say, I know we had conversations in the past and considering these changes, I thought it made sense to reconnect and see if this is a more appropriate time for a conversation. Like, and just
I really love that.
Yeah. And just build it into like, I think one of the hardest things is building the emotion of like, okay, now I have, this person told me no, I'm not going to just like be bummed and never respond to their email, I'm going to, one, call them, make sure that not interested is they're really not interested, or they really want me to follow up in 3 months. I need to, qualify that, see if we can create urgency now. And that's where you have like your why now. Like, no, I emailed you now because these events are happening. Let's try to get this demo for this quarter. But if it doesn't happen, like, okay, cool. And then just like the discipline to put them into a follow-up sequence. And then they might tell you no, and they might push you off again. And then they might tell you no and might push you off again. But if you're persistent about it, respectfully persistent, professionally persistent, you're following the rules that they set up for you, then there's a pretty good chance that you could book them. And they're kind of like little golden nuggets that you've laid for yourself out in the future, where you're like, it's not money now, but it will be one day. And I mean, like, I've prospected people for 6 months, and gotten pushed and blah, blah, blah. And eventually they take a meeting, and it's like, hallelujah. But it's also, it feels a little bit like an easy win. I'm like, whew, great. Well, I did that one.
Right. Like you were kind of already counting on that happening because past you was smart and put them in the sequence and did the right work so that future you could reap those benefits on a bit of a less intensive scale.
And I can tell you, like, right now, just looking at what I have set up for this quarter, I have like two meetings, like 2 opportunities that came from just being very patiently persistent, finding new inciting incidents and reaching out. And then you've got really good rapport. That's when you show up on the call and your AE says, so why did you take this meeting today? And the prospect goes, well, I just got to tell you, Sarah is very, very persistent, and you really need to give her a raise. And we're like, oh, I'll just tag my manager in that call. That's like a really good feeling when the prospect is like, well, actually, like, your SDR was so consistent and good and respected like my timeline, but also stayed top of mind, that I had to follow through because they were doing such a good job. That's a really good feeling.
That's like the best feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do we go from here? That's what I got to say about that.
Well, I think it's interesting. That you brought up urgency, because, we talked a lot about, objection handling and kind of navigating people who have varying levels of interest, different situations, and they're in different places in their buying journey. But I think another battleground for SDRs is maintaining urgency, because I myself have many reps of getting people interested and, getting that momentum towards a meeting, or maybe even getting that meeting, but then the deal stalling, or maybe an expectation wasn't met, or maybe information was missing, or maybe it wasn't focused on the right thing. And so to go beyond just objection handling, what other categories of follow-ups do you think modern SDRs should keep in mind as they kind of go through this process development?
Yeah. So, like, what ways should I be following up with prospects? Sorry, there's a lot in there. I'm trying to wrap my head around where we're going.
Yeah. So I think, beyond the no, once you finally get somebody interested in a validated interest, I think that's, one step. But the second step that I think is just as hard sometimes is maintaining that urgency and keeping that momentum towards the direction that you as an SDR want to take them.
Yeah. So one, I think it does kind of go back a little bit to objection handling. What happened on that cold call? Because sometimes what happens is someone says, yeah, like they respond to your email and they'll say, yep, I'll take a meeting. But then you never got any context for the why. Or you have a phone conversation and they say, yeah, that does sound interesting. Yeah, let's talk next week. But you never got context for why they're actually showing up. They just said it sounded interesting. So, like, is it objection handling? Is it asking good questions? It's just like trying to understand. So something about your messaging hit the mark. Great. I'm really excited. It's like after they say, yes, I'll take a meeting. It's not being like, great, I sent you a calendar invite. Bye. Yeah. It's being like, great. So, my thought on this meeting is, and granted, I don't do this all the time because I also get happy ears. So this is me telling you things that I've heard other smart people to say, and I try to do, but don't always do. But like, get on the phone, someone says, yep, I'll take a meeting. Cool. Awesome. So, my idea for the agenda for this is that, you're going to have some questions for us about Gong and, what it is we do to help out businesses like yours. And I'm sure you're going to have some questions, and I'm going to have some questions for you, around, what your challenges are, what your priorities are. Is there anything specific that I should make sure my account executive covers in this meeting to make sure that it's valuable to you? Just like, what do I need to make sure is on that agenda? Okay, great. Now I have like some pieces. And that's where they go, well, actually, when you were giving me the pitch, when you were telling me your value prop, this thing is happening in our business. We hired like 15 new salespeople, and then we had to go remote because of COVID-19, and they're all field sellers. So, we've really been trying to figure out how to maximize efficiency. And when you mentioned that thing about efficiency and working remote, I thought that sounded interesting. Okay, cool. Yes. What are you guys doing right now? Like, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but like, what specifically about that is like really a challenge? Okay, cool. I'll make sure that we address how we're solving for that. Great. It was so nice talking to you. Can't wait to see you next week. Right? I don't do that all the time. That's my objective in life. That's like, if someone actually says yes after I pitch, which there's usually a series of objection handlings that happen, gotta kind of box it out with my words. Then if someone takes the meeting, then it's like, okay, cool. So like, make sure we cover what you care about. Because then when they cancel on you or say this is no longer a priority, say, I'm confused. When we spoke, I understood that you had 15 new sales reps that are really struggling to, navigate the waters of working remote when they typically are in the field. Can you help me understand, so is that no longer the number one priority for you?
Yeah, and that's something you can't do if you didn't get that information. Like if you didn't do the due diligence on your end to make sure that you were setting expectations and really understanding the why, like you said, behind them agreeing to a meeting, you don't have that ammo available to you later on if they do cancel the meeting or if it does get pushed off for a few months for some reason. Like you can't bring that up. It's just like, oh, they canceled it. I wonder why. I'm just as lost as I would be, had I done nothing. So
exactly. And sometimes there's something that they said in the call, where, one time somebody told me they were interested in, they said, pipeline's our biggest problem. So I found a case study of a company that had leveraged Gong because they had, all of these, qualified MQLs from marketing, but SDRs weren't qualifying any of them in their discovery calls. And so there was like this big blockage happening on the SDR team, and there was only a tiny drip hitting the sales org. Well, they used Gong. They figured out that the SDRs didn't know how to run a true discovery call, and that the process was messed up. And if they could just qualify these MQLs properly, then they'd actually be passing a ton more hot leads to the sales team. And so I sent him that case study. It was like a video. I was like, hey, you talked about how qualified leads are a challenge for you right now. Just wanted to share how we're helping out companies with that same problem. Here's this case study. And then and then it's there. So if you can just send them a piece of collateral that has to do with what you guys talked about, or even if you can't get them on the phone after they say yes, they'll take a meeting, or they send you, it's always a good feeling if someone sends an email back that's just a time to meet, and then you can just send the calendar invite. You can always send follow-up that has to do with what was the initial premise of your email in the first place. And if your email was a bad one, that was just a feature benefit email, well, we need to watch a different video series for that. This one's not about that.
We can spend a whole video series talking about just that and how to craft cold emails. Isn't that right, Grayson? No, I think you brought up a really good point early on, and this sort of leads into more of a nurture-based discussion, but the idea of getting that information first and foremost, why would someone be interested in the call? What is most important to them? And then leveraging that later on in the sales cycle so that should that first meeting fizzle out, like Grayson had mentioned, and you need to follow up in 3 months or 6 months or however long, keeping them engaged throughout that longer time period can be really difficult. And it's how you go about doing that sort of in the way that you said, the pleasantly persistent or professionally persistent way is important, but like context is more than anything important.
Yeah.
There. Just sending a, hey, checking in a month and a half email means nothing. But
if you send them your words, not mine, and you quote them from your
exactly.
last call,
that has so much more weight to it, and like actually drives the conversation forward versus like, here's this SDR reaching out to me again. Why won't they get the hint? I'm not interested, but like I did tell them I would follow up in 6 months. So like, I guess I have to entertain them. Like you're just building bad animosity and distrust, and that's
and I think that if you spend a little more time thinking about the quality of your outreach and you really try to, then people will get the bad taste out of their mouths of SDRs, which is from like, 5-10 years ago when like the spray and pray, which some people still do, was very prevalent. And, if you do a good job with your outreach, you can elevate the profession, and then you can, then people will be much more pleasant when they pick up the phone.
Yes. That's the dream.
One step at a time,
yes.
One podcast at a time. We shall overcome.
We shall overcome. Cool.
Says Grandma Sarah.
So I wanted to close out with just a final question about kind of this journey that we've been talking about. I think a lot of the topics we've been touching on kind of goes back to the big picture of, every buying situation is different, and you just need to be diligent in doing the things you need to do at the right time to really build that urgency, maintain that urgency, and have your due diligence done so you know how to easily pass them off to an AE still interested and ready to go. So with that being said, do you have any best practices that you'd want to share around timing and cadence when it comes to like the journey of a buyer? Because I think that might be a big challenge for SDRs, especially those who get advice from, enterprise sellers, or maybe they get advice from transactional sellers, but they're in different spaces. So it's kind of hard to find the right rhythm for them.
Yeah. Well, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's like, if I work enterprise accounts, and that's what I talk about on LinkedIn. And if you're following all the stuff that I talk about for just enterprise accounts, but you're working SMB and you're working like a super transactional sale that's like 3 days, some of the tactics aren't necessarily going to work, because what I do is I go and I like read quarterly earnings calls and I figure out what, a CEO is talking about, and I tie that into why they should buy Gong. But if what I sell doesn't need that, it needs a different kind of research or different kinds of tactics, I think it's super dependent on understanding who you're selling to, what you're selling, what problems you're solving. And then if you just take like 5 minutes to think about that, you can start putting you can start connecting the dots and start thinking like, okay, so I've been talking to these types of people in my onboarding training. They talked to me about my ICP. They told me they care about these things. This problem that they have occurs X amount of times a day, or X amount of times a quarter, or whatever. How does what I know about them and what I'm trying to put together, how can I make that work and make it and reach out to them in a persistent and professional way? And then also do a little self-reflection on, I also get spammed in my inbox from marketing all the time. I also get, phone calls from people sometimes, and I get, LinkedIn messages. I get those things. So what do you not like about that? And how can you elevate beyond what they're doing? Don't, if it's a bane to you, don't make yourself the bane to someone else. Does that answer the question? I don't know if it did, but I tried.
It sounded like you said the best practice is to avoid the bad practice.
Oh yeah, yep, that's what it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the bad practice is so like prevalent and out there and easily findable that like, yeah, you can just, it's like, oh, don't do that. The thing that like 80% of the people were doing, great, solid.
Yeah, I mean, before you hit send, think, would this piss me off if it landed in my inbox? Would I feel super uncomfortable if someone called me and just like steamrolled me into trying to take a meeting when I don't know who they are? I don't think I'd like that.
Yeah.
So what could I do? What could I do to make me feel better about that? Okay. Like, well, if that would make me feel better, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens if I just chat with someone real casual, like on LinkedIn, about their life. Ooh, magic. Got a meeting.
Score.
Yes.
Awesome, Sarah. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of SDRepresent. Before we wrap things up, where can the audience find more about you or learn more about Gong?
Yeah, you can go to gong.io to learn more about Gong. That's our website. You can visit my LinkedIn page. My name is Sarah Brazier, Brazier, means small fire. Fun fact. And then I think that I put together like a video series a while ago. There still are some coming out, but it's called Life After SDR. And that's both on LinkedIn and on YouTube. That's a video series I put together with Gong. So those are the places you can find me. YouTube, on Gong's YouTube, Gong's website, gong.io, LinkedIn. And I have an Instagram, but I don't use it.
You and me both.
Haven't posted in 3 years. My tag is, I'm terrible at Instagram. But I scroll through so I can see the pot commercials. like pots to cook.
Yeah, it's a callback from the beginning of the episode. I'm with you.
It's
full cycle.
Connecting the dots. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again for hopping on. It was a great conversation. Loved having you. And yeah, everyone check her out on LinkedIn. Sarah's awesome.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It was great being here. Happy prospecting.